Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Tizenguzen is with you. Today is June 4th. The main news at this moment. Ukrainian drones chased the remaining Russian ships in occupied Crimea today. They chased them successfully. Units from the Unmanned Systems Forces struck the Project 10,410 Svetlyak patrol ship. Now, I'll show you the video, but pay attention to how, at the end of this clip, the Russian sailors unsuccessfully try to pretend, I don't even know, maybe to be crabs or jellyfish. It doesn't work. Watch this video.
Повітряна тривога, лети до Таганрога, дістань до Волгограда, Саратов потруси, нехай гримить в Тамбові, Рязані та Ростові, як до Москви дістанешся, то нахуй рознеси. Дехто каже, що це гріх і так не треба, гнів та розпач можуть карму зіпсувати. Бачу сльози, чути стогін аж до...
In short, some of these sailors will meet the crew of the destroyed cruiser Moskva today. By the way, it's interesting that the attack took place near the village of Yurkino. That's literally 12 kilometers from the Crimean Bridge. Help! FSB agents on boats are being sunk right near Kerch. And finally, Russians have been given an explanation about what's happening with fuel in the Russian Federation. The government of the Russian Federation announced that the fuel situation is stable. Let me remind you, this is after gasoline disappeared not only in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but also in almost 20 regions. Restrictions have been introduced there. Let me quote the Deputy Prime Minister of the Russian Federation, Alexander Novak, in light of reports about gasoline shortages. Do you know what he said? At present, the situation is stable. Stable how? Is it steadily getting worse? Has a stable disaster arrived? Or what exactly is stable? Why don't they use their favorite trick here, by the way, with that phrase negative growth? Don't worry, everything is nice and stable. Oil refineries are steadily burning, Ukrainian drones are steadily arriving. Everything is stable. Let's disperse, Russians. Well, the situation is taking on an increasingly threatening character. Every night, Ukrainian drones are simply taking out Russian oil refineries and depots. And it's going to get even worse. It will get even worse, believe me. In general, judging by the mood of the Z bloggers, there's a growing realization that everything is clearly going in the wrong direction. Humiliation. A whole series of humiliations and unpleasant news. Humiliation with the permission for Putin's parade on May 9th, the opening of the St. Petersburg Economic Forum marked by a Ukrainian fireworks display, the first massive strikes on Moscow, Ukrainian drones flying as far as 1,500 or even 2,000 kilometers, burning fuel trucks, logistics being cut off in southern Russia. What can Putin offer in response to this for Russians in the information space? Bomb Ukrainian cities again? Mumble once more with his dentures that all targets have been hit, that the strike of retribution has punished everyone, but no one believes that anymore. With each such strike, even harsher news arrives for Russians. And now, a representative of the Ukrainian defense industry comes out and says that already this summer, Ukrainian ballistic missiles will fly to Moscow. Right now, they're testing it out, and this will be an entirely new stage of the war. And you know, for us, accuracy isn't that important there. I mean, a Russian oil refinery is the size of a small city. Being off by 10 meters more or less doesn't really matter. But missiles targeting oil refineries, that's a completely different story. Meanwhile, at the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, which honestly is just a total cringe fest, they presented a commemorative token made of pure silver featuring Putin's portrait and the words, "Our cause is just, victory will be ours." Take a look. Where did that balding mackerel get the idea for a token like this? Once they also minted a silver medal for Hitler. This is what it looked like. It says, "The future is ours." Yes, the future is yours. Another one of Putin's idols also had a similar medal minted for himself with almost the same inscription. Here it's practically word for word. I'm talking about Stalin now. At this point, you really don't know who Putin is cosplaying, Stalin or Hitler after all. And here they are, all three together. Look at them, such fine fellows, right? Putin actually borrowed a lot from Hitler. We are Russians, God is with us. That's their motto. On the Wehrmacht belt buckles, let me remind you, it was written, God is with us. Propaganda techniques. The Russians didn't bother much. Everything is straight from Goebbels' manuals. By the way, Putin recently quoted Goebbels, although in reality he was quoting Hitler himself, but the nuances aren't that important here. So Putin studies these materials and actively uses them. I hope the ending will be the same as that of the failed Austrian painter, by self-elimination in a bunker. I hope Putin will reach that point soon. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It's important, it helps promote the channel. We are fighting against Putin's propaganda. Let's do it together. So make sure to subscribe. Here's another interesting observation. At the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg today, the head of the central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, was supposed to speak, but she disappeared from the program. Later it was reported that she is on sick leave. You know, I think she just didn't want to embarrass herself by making up stories about the Russian economy soaring into space and talking about how the sanctions are supposedly very beneficial for the Russian economy. Lately, her facial expressions have been giving her away. Nabiullina's expressions, especially when Putin talks about new achievements. Nabiullina's face involuntarily stretches out in a certain way. That's why they decided to hide her this time. And one more statement. The deputy foreign minister of the Russian Federation, Alexander Pankin, stated that Russia is no longer just a gas station. Listen, of course, he just forgot to add one important detail, thanks to Ukraine. Honestly, when I look at their so-called economic forum, there's Dugin yelling that they need to nuke everyone. Some kind of Chinese robots in ballet tutus are running through the corridors. Representatives of the Taliban are walking back and forth, sharing their economic experience. It's like, you know, a fever dream of someone with a temperature of 40 degrees. Unfortunately, this entire huge, sick country is now at war against Ukraine. And Ukraine has not only stopped the Russian spring offensive, but continues to destroy them by the thousands. In every episode, we have an important fundraiser for the defense forces of Ukraine. Today, we are continuing to raise funds for the Freedom of Russia Legion, which is fighting for Ukraine. The Legion is currently fighting on almost all of the hottest fronts, but not only at the front lines, they are also making things very, very unpleasant for the occupiers behind enemy lines in the Russian Federation. The commander of the Legion, the legendary Caesar, has recorded a video message for you. Please take a look.
Дорогой Борис Тизенгаузен, уважаемые подписчики его канала, от имени бойцов Легиона Свободы России я хочу поблагодарить вас за всю ту помощь, которую вы нам не раз оказывали. Сейчас я снова обращаюсь к вам за помощью. Нам нужны средства на ремонт наших автомобилей, нам нужны средства на закупку БПЛА. Мы будем вам очень благодарны и в этот раз. Вместе с вами мы обязательно победим. Слава Украине! Свобода России!
Let's help the Legion. The link to donate is in the description of this video. There are mono, private, and PayPal options for those who want to help from abroad. In every episode, I thank you separately. You are simply incredible. Thank you for supporting Ukraine and our soldiers. Import substitution news. 60 billion rubles will be spent in Russia to convert the Chinese Geely into the Russian Volga. The Nizhny Novgorod automobile plant has signed a contract with the Ministry of Industry and Trade to localize 3 Chinese models. Under the Volga brand, they will be sold for 3 million, for 4 million, while the original Chinese models in China cost about 1 million. Now that's business, that's what I call it. So basically, they just swap out the badges on these Chinese cars and put Volga instead of their original names. Maybe they'll even stitch Volga somewhere on the seat cover, and that's it. That's what I call localization. But just so you don't think I'm always nitpicking and that nothing Russian was presented there, that everything was Chinese, that's actually not the case. There were also Russian robots from the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology at the forum. They called them champion robots. These champion robots played football. Let's take a look at how it went.
данный момент от джойстика есть соревнования, где они играют
So these are the champions. Well, in my opinion, that was the Medvedev robot. Those are not champion robots at all. That's pure Medvedev any day of the week. In general, the Economic Forum has, in a way, become a place for revelations. Just take this statement, for example. Oil production in Russia is currently lower than at the beginning of the year due to unscheduled repairs at refineries. This was stated by none other than Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak. In other words, he admits that they even had to cut oil production because of Ukrainian drone strikes. However, he doesn't admit by how much they had to cut, but soon we'll have those numbers. If Russians have to mothball their wells, and that's where things are heading, it will be a real disaster for them. I hope that's exactly what happens. One of the most, in my opinion, unhinged Russian deputies, Milonov, called on Russians to use Chinese smartphones after the FSB reported large-scale surveillance of Russian officials. In fact, Milonov himself has been repeatedly spotted with a new iPhone. Not only that, I think he was one of the first in Russia to buy the new iPhone, the orange one, and he would show it off in front of all the cameras on every talk show. But really, who was Milonov even addressing? To Russian pensioners so that, God forbid, they don't buy themselves a new iPhone? To whom? Rospotrebnadzor in St. Petersburg refused to comment on residents' complaints about smoke and the smell of burning. In fact, I specifically picked this news to understand how the information space works in the Russian Federation. It's just an amazing country. Everyone can see the smoke, the burning, the smell from their windows. It's impossible to breathe. Everyone knows what happened. But on TV, silence. Absolutely nothing was said. That oil terminal is blazing, burning over there. Silence, nothing. They talked about Putin, talked about the forum, talked about those Medvedev robots or whatever, but nothing about this. And the chief meteorologist of St. Petersburg, Alexander Kolesov, in turn said that the air in the city is perfectly clean, everything is fine. How does it go? Everything is stable. That's how it is. Meanwhile, at that forum, there was some kind of bacchanalia going on. The Kremlin's court philosopher Dugin demanded to nuke not only Ukraine, but also Europe. He always has one idea crazier than the next. Here, for example, is his latest idea. And it's not like he's just some local madman. He was officially speaking on a panel. Well, basically, just like all Russian officials, Dugin proposed populating Russian cities with robots and handing power over to them. Handing power over to robots. To those ones, you know, the ones that keep falling over and flailing around. In his opinion, mass robotization should become one of the key goals for Russia's development, regardless of financial constraints. The country needs a large-scale robotization program and the transfer of management functions to artificial intelligence. We must populate the country with an army of Russian robots. If there's no money for robots, we'll just print some. Dugin declared that every city would be headed by a robot. Well, obviously, he's already lost it. The Kukushechka ensemble has already disappeared somewhere over the hills and far away. An army of Russian robots already sounds kind of creepy. Not the typical robots who would get drunk and start stabbing each other with screwdrivers. By the way, Dugin pointed out the advantages of robots compared to humans. First of all, they're more interesting, Dugin stated. Secondly, they're smarter, they're more efficient, they're not surrounded by flesh that makes an ordinary person want to sleep, eat, take a walk, or go for a stroll. They are focused on their goal. I think we need to be like robots, Dugin said. Then we won't be replaced, he explained. Basically, Dugin suggests that Russians shouldn't eat, sleep, go for walks, or drink, but instead work at the factory around the clock. In the name of the great Putin, then Russians won't be replaced by robots. What a wonderful future. Why not? And what will Russian robots be made of, I wonder? Chinese components? You can't even make nails yourselves. What Russian robots? Whenever I hear the phrase Russian robots, you know, something wild and scary comes to mind. Oh, remember that Russian robot Fedor, the one that was sent to the ISS and couldn't do anything there? After that, they wrote him off to a museum. Let me remind you, the Russians once came up with the idea to send a robot into orbit whose skills included drilling and shooting with 2 pistols, one in each hand. In other words, those are the most essential skills for the International Space Station, in case anyone didn't know. So who exactly was this robot supposed to shoot at with 2 pistols on the ISS? And what was it supposed to drill? So basically, it's probably some kind of saboteur robot. Books about the so-called special military operation heroes have been added to the summer reading list for school children. Watch out, Russian kids. The main thing is that your psyche doesn't get destroyed by these little books, by these SVO heroes. Just think about it. These ghouls who kill in Ukraine for money and die themselves in utter disgrace, these are the people children will be reading about in their summer extracurricular reading. Well, what else is there to read? And I've prepared a few examples for you of who could be the hero in these children's books. And here are the participants of the war: Dmitry Malyshev, the Volgograd cannibal, a heart-eater, convicted for a series of murders. He killed a person, cut out their heart, ate it, went off to fight in the war with Ukraine, and was pardoned. There's your hero number one. Alexander Maslenikov, a dismemberment maniac convicted for the murder and dismemberment of 2 people. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He went to fight in the war with Ukraine and was pardoned by Putin. That's 2 heroes for the book. Denis Gorin, the Sakhalin cannibal, convicted for several murders. He went to fight in the war with Ukraine and was pardoned by Putin. That's 3 heroes. Nikolai Ogalabiak, a participant in the so-called Yaroslavl satanic case, convicted for the ritual murder of 4 teenagers and cannibalism in general. There's a whole list. After serving in the Storm Z unit, he was pardoned. That's 4 heroes. There are, of course, hundreds of such heroes in quotation marks. You could write several volumes and include them in the school curriculum. Kids wouldn't be able to finish reading these books even over the whole summer. And many of these so-called heroes return and commit crimes again, so Russians even have a chance to meet the heroes of these new books. Though judging by everything, it would probably be the last time they meet them. And the story about the visit of the American delegation to Putin's forum has taken an interesting turn. It turns out that no one officially sent them there. The head of the State Department, Marco Rubio, stated that he knows nothing about an official US delegation at Putin's economic forum. Yesterday, I mentioned that the head of the US President's Commission on Fine Arts, Rodney Mims Cook Jr., is present at this forum. He admires Russian writers and talks about some kind of humanitarian bridge. I even showed photos of him with his daughter against the backdrop of some kind of Slavic architecture, saying that Trump blessed him for this trip. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that he knows nothing at all about this trip. Well, I mean, I get it. It's a game. Trump sends someone. Rubio denies it. I understand all of this. By the way, before this, Putin's aide Ushakov reported that for the first time in several years, an official American delegation would be attending the forum. So it turns out Ushakov was just making things up. So who's lying? Or did Mr. Cook just go there, to have some black caviar? But really, it's a disgrace, a disgrace. Putin kills Ukrainians every day, right before this shabby forum. Massive shelling of Ukraine every day, Kharkiv every day, Kherson every day, Dnipro, the frontline cities, Sumy, they're hitting Chernihiv too. And it's not just the frontline cities that are constantly under fire, but the representative for the fine arts is singing praises to the regime of murderers. It's as if a representative of the US in 1943 rushed off to a banquet with Hitler. It's about the same thing. Here's another continuation of yet another story. A continuation of the story with the racketeer Metropolitan. The patriarch of the FSB and all Russia, Kirill, has sent Metropolitan Ilarion to serve in the Argentine South American diocese. That very same Metropolitan Ilarion who was detained in the Czech Republic with 4 containers of a prohibited substance in the form of white powder. And instead of sending this Metropolitan to prison or writing him off somewhere, they are sending him to the Argentine diocese. As they say, Russia is a land of opportunity. Apparently, the Metropolitan wasn't punished at all. They just sent him for an internship. Soon he'll be heading some parish in Colombia. By the way, that's not far across the border. Why let such talent go to waste, right? Let him move containers on an industrial scale now. And here's another piece of news. This time, it's the head of the Moscow exchange who decided to crack a joke. I think this will be the last time he jokes like that. The head of the Moscow exchange stated that the stock market refused to follow Putin's orders. In nominal terms, said the head of the Moscow exchange, when the directive was given, it was about tripling the exchange's capitalization. Now it needs to be quadrupled. In other words, we're moving very quickly at a good pace, but unfortunately in the opposite direction. This refers to Putin's May decree of 2024. At that time, Putin set the goal of increasing the capitalization of the Russian stock market by 2030. That is, the Kremlin wanted Russian companies to be worth significantly more than they are now. But the stock market didn't listen to the underground commander and went the other way. In fact, it ran. That's how things happen in Russia. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. Subscribe to this channel, don't forget. And let's help the legion that is defending Ukraine. The link to donate is in the description of this video. Have a peaceful day, everyone, and glory to Ukraine.